deepening its false territorial claims. Tokyo says publishers of school textbooks in Japan are now required by law to refer to Korea's easternmost island of Dokdo as Japanese territory. It's official. April 27th has been set as the date for a summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The two sides have yet to agree on the agenda. Plus, US President Donald Trump raises the possibility of holding up recently agreed amendments on the South Korea-US Free Trade Agreement until a deal is reached with North Korea. So Japan is once again getting involved in a sensitive territorial issue, angering South Korea at a time when Seoul and Tokyo need to work together amid the push for diplomacy with North Korea. In its official gazette released on Friday, the Japanese government said it's revising high school teaching guidelines to say, wrongly, that the Dokdo Island in the East Sea is Japanese territory, not Korean. Our Park Ji-won joins us on the line for more on this story. So, Ji-won, tell us more.
Yes, Mark. Disappointingly, the Japanese government has announced its revised teaching guidelines for high school students through its official gazette on Friday. With the announcement, Japan now has the legal basis to teach false and distorted information to its future generations. Last year, the Japanese government also revised its legally binding teaching guidelines for elementary and middle school students to include wrong territorial claims toward Korea's easternmost island, Dokdo. Back in 2008, Japan first started to include the provocative claim that Korea and Japan do not share a common understanding on Dokdo and its non-legally binding middle school teaching guideline commentary, causing strong protests and backlash from the Korean government. So now it seems that for the last 10 years, despite official protests from Korea, Japan has made its education system from elementary school to high school teach students these false territorial claims over Dokdo. With the changes, publishers of school textbooks in Japan are now required by law to refer to Dokdo as Japanese territory, and the textbooks for elementary schools should include such wrongful territorial claims from 2020, middle school books from 2021, and high school textbooks from 2022. The Korean government has strongly criticized the Japanese government's move, urging it to repeal its legally binding teaching guidelines. On this Friday morning, a statement by Korea's foreign ministry said Dokdo is historically and legally Korea's territory, and which was first occupied during Japan's attempt to colonize Korea in the past, and it vowed to strongly respond to such moves.
The date is set. The highly anticipated summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will be held on April 27th at the inter-Korean border. However, the agenda for the meeting is still up in the air. Our Oh Jung-hee reports.
The two Koreas will hold their third historic summit on April 27th at the Peace House located on the South Korean side of the truce village of Panmunjom. The announcement came after high-level delegations from Seoul and Pyongyang wrapped up their meeting at Panmunjom on Thursday afternoon.
South and North Korea agreed to work together to successfully hold an inter-Korean summit in view of the historic significance it will have in terms of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, building peace, and improving inter-Korean relations. With the agreement of both leaders, the South and the North have decided to hold the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit on April 27th at the Peace House in Panmunjom.
For now, it's expected that the Seoul-Pyongyang summit will only last a day. To prepare, the two Koreas will hold a couple of working-level talks. The first round will be held on April 4th to discuss protocol, security, and press coverage for the summit. The second meeting will cover communications, but when and where it's held hasn't yet been decided. Seoul and Pyongyang will continue exchanging documents as they prepare. South Korea has had three major topics for President Moon Jae-in to discuss with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un: denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula, building a lasting peace with lower tensions, and finally improving inter-Korean relations. The two Koreas agreed Thursday that the three items should be taken up at the summit, but the topics couldn't be narrowed down any further. Asked about the agenda of the summit, North Korea's Lee Sun-kwon only said, quote, "Our agenda covers everything in inter-Korean relations." Seoul has also left open the possibility of holding another round of high-level talks in April to iron out the details. The North Korean side did not mention anything about denuclearization at Thursday's high-level talks, but South Korea's unification minister reaffirmed that denuclearization is a central topic that's been discussed since the January 9th high-level talks and during several trips back and forth between Seoul and Pyongyang. 오정희, Arirang News.
So the two Koreas and the United States are in a race against time to be ready for their big summits in the coming weeks. With so many issues to cover, the respective sides are having to identify their priorities. It goes without saying that one of the main goals of Seoul and Washington is putting North Korea on the course to peaceful denuclearization. But is that really a realistic goal? Kim Hye-sung reports.
The two Koreas held summit talks back in 2000 and 2007 to improve their bilateral relationship. The upcoming April summit talks will be the third historic meeting, but the stakes are higher with North Korea in its final stages of nuclear weapons development and a somewhat unpredictable U.S. President Donald Trump who even threatened a possible preemptive strike. So what are some of the key conditions for the talks to succeed and really help achieve a peaceful denuclearization of the Korean peninsula?
The definition of denuclearization, that's what experts say, is critical above all else.
What South Korea and the U.S. mean by denuclearization is the North completely giving up nuclear weapons. But North Korea hasn't made clear yet whether it means giving up nuclear weapons, a freeze, or what. At the summit, Seoul needs to get Pyongyang to make this clear.
Previous talks failed. The North reneged on the signed agreements and continued to develop nuclear weapons. This time, before talking about any kind of give and take like economic rewards or North Korea normalizing relations with the U.S., South Korea needs to confirm the North's sincerity and its commitment to denuclearize if the talks are to succeed and if Seoul is to keep its alliance with Washington strong. But managed expectations from the Trump administration is also needed.
It will be helpful to get a better sense of parameters and manage expectations. If he goes into the negotiations and pushes Kim Jong-un to immediately, denuclearize, to agree to his conditions or else, I just hope that he doesn't come back and then listen to the very hawkish advice of his national security advisor, immediately ratchet up tensions and consider military option.
To keep the summit from falling apart, finding a realistic bottom line North Korea and the U.S. can agree on is key. The parties also need to keep holding preparatory meetings like the Track 1.5 talks between Seoul, Washington, and Pyongyang held in Finland last week. This is where South Korea's role and the Inter-Korean Summit serve as a bridge between Washington and Pyongyang. Another condition for the talks to succeed is that South Korea, which got the ball rolling on the summit, be able to deal with the variables and changing strategic dynamics. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's trip to Beijing is something that complicates the equation, which experts interpret as the North's attempt to enhance its negotiation position against South Korea and the U.S. amid the tensions between China and the U.S. over trade.
South Korea needs to cooperate with its neighbors and make sure the tough sanctions on the North stay in place. We're seeing a possible breakthrough in solving the North Korea crisis. It's like a puzzle, with the pieces representing many different interests. We need to put it together with caution and preparation, or else we're back to brinksmanship.
Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
Now, President Moon Jae-in is set to meet with Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi at the presidential office of Chonghua Day. He's expected to receive a briefing from the Chinese special envoy this afternoon on the recent exchanges between Beijing and Pyongyang. Yang, who arrived in Seoul on Thursday, insisted Kim Jong-un's recent surprise visit to Beijing and his meeting with President Xi Jinping will only benefit the April 27th summit between the two Koreas. He also said China will continue its support for both the inter-Korean and US-North Korea summits while seeking cooperation with Seoul to accomplish denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and establish lasting peace in the region. An Olympic delegation headed by IOC Chief Thomas Bach is in Pyongyang after they were invited by Kim Jong-un during the 2018 Winter Olympics that were held here in South Korea. Bach, who played a key role in allowing North Korea to take part in the Pyeongchang Games, landed late Thursday and met with North Korea's sports minister Kim Il-guk and the North's IOC representative Jang Eun. The IOC says discussions will focus on the development of sports in North Korea and the preparation of its athletes to qualify and take part in upcoming Olympic Games. It's unclear whether the IOC chief will meet with Kim Jong-un, who just returned home, as we heard, from a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, his first known trip outside of the country as leader. US President Donald Trump has raised eyebrows with his latest comments on the amendment to the South Korea-US free trade deal. Speaking before a crowd of union builders on Thursday in Ohio, Trump said he may hold up the recently amended FTA until a deal is made with North Korea. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Before the ink has even dried on the newly amended South Korea-US FTA, President Trump said he may hold up the trade deal in order to use the deal as leverage in any upcoming negotiations with North Korea and their nuclear program. Calling it a strong card, Trump made it clear how he wants to use the trade deal.
Just this week, we secured a wonderful deal with South Korea, and I may hold it up till after a deal is made with North Korea. Does everybody understand that? Do you know why, right? Do you know why? Because it's a very strong card. And I want to make sure everyone is treated fairly, and we're moving along very nicely with North Korea. We'll see what happens.
Observers say it's unclear how holding up the trade deal with South Korea, one of America's closest allies, could help the U.S. in dealing with North Korea. This comes as U.S. diplomats have emphasized that any meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un would simply be a meeting and not a formal negotiation on the North's nuclear weapons program. Meanwhile, the South Korean government on Thursday demanded the U.S. correct a recent statement on the U.S. Trade Representative website, stating that the U.S. Treasury Department is leading discussions on currency with South Korea's finance ministry. Adding to the dispute was a fact sheet issued by the U.S. Trade Representative on Wednesday, stating that a memorandum of understanding is being finalized on robust provisions to prohibit competitive devaluation and exchange rate manipulation. According to Seoul's Ministry of Strategy and Finance, the exchange rate issue is entirely unrelated to the FTA, as such an agreement would likely deal a heavy blow to South Korea, as it's such an export-dependent economy. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, despite an uptick in consumption, output across all industries in Korea dropped 0.8% in February compared to the same month last year. Statistics Korea says most of the gains came from the mining and manufacturing sectors on increased output from the automobile and semiconductor sectors. Retail sales, they increased around 1%. However, output in the services sector edged down 0.1% from the previous month, recording a fifth straight month of decline. The statistics agency projects the construction sector to worsen in the coming weeks as orders plunged by nearly 40% on year in February. Now, the number of high schoolers per teacher is falling here in Korea. At the same time, there has been a dramatic dip in the rate of graduates advancing to universities or junior colleges. It could be viewed as a concerning development in a traditionally studious culture, but according to our Won Jung-hwan, there's more to this trend than meets the eye.
A few generations ago in South Korea, going to college was something unusual. Now it's the opposite, so much so that those who don't go are sometimes labeled as failures. By the end of high school, for most of South Koreans, it's been 12 or more years in school. Late-night cram sessions and test prep classes with the hope of getting into a prestigious university, preferably in the capital, Seoul. The percentage of high school graduates enrolling in higher education has risen significantly since 1990s, reaching a high water mark in 2008 at 83.8%. It appeared to be a mark of huge progress in the local education sector. Since the turn of the decade, however, the trend seemed to have started shifting, and the rate has fallen steadily since then. According to the Social Indicators report from Statistics Korea, the rate last year for high school grads heading into tertiary education dipped by 0.9 of a percentage point from the previous year to 68.9%. While that's not a massive drop, the ongoing decline could mean something is changing in Korean society. Experts point to the changing career ambitions of young people and reform in the educational system.
Various reasons have contributed to the drop in the enrollment rate. First, there's been some controversy about the opportunity cost of getting a college degree. Second, during the Im Young-bak administration, the government opened more than 20 specialized trade schools as an alternative to university, encouraging high school graduates to skip college and head straight into the workforce.
Another reason for the decline in enrollment rates could be changing perceptions of how best to pursue a career. Despite the persistent view in Korea that a degree confers overwhelming advantages, some students say they can do just fine without one, or just wait till later.
I don't think my future is guaranteed even if I go to college. I think getting a job all depends on my skills and experience.
Whether you go to college or not, the most important thing is doing what you want. And I don't think it's too late to take some time and think about what you want and maybe go to college at some point down the road.
Even though it's still widely thought that not going for higher education badly hurts your chances in the Korean job market, the numbers could be telling us that society is accommodating more of those who choose a different path. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
Now for a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we're going to start in Russia. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is booting out dozens of American diplomats in the wake of Washington's decision to expel a bunch of Russian diplomats over the poisoning of a former Russian spy in the UK. For more on this and other international news, let's turn to our No Adam. So Adam, fill us in on what Lavrov had to say.
Well, Mark, Lavrov says Russia is expelling 60 US diplomats and officials in retaliation for identical US measures announced earlier this week. They have 1 week to leave, and the US consulate in St. Petersburg will also be shut in retaliation for the closure of the Russian consulate in Seattle.
U.S. Ambassador Mr. Huntsman has been invited to our ministry, where my deputy Mr. Ryalkov briefs him on our response to the U.S. These measures include the expulsion of the same number of diplomats, and this includes our decision to withdraw the license for the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg.
Lavrov has blamed Washington for leading the mass expulsion of Russian diplomats in the West and said Moscow will enforce similar measures on countries that joined it. US State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert said the Russian move was unjustified.
I want to remind you that there is no justification for the Russian response. Our actions were motivated purely by the attack on the United Kingdom. So we are reading this, we are reviewing it, and will respond accordingly.
More than 24 nations have joined the UK in pointing the finger at Moscow for the nerve-agent attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury earlier this month. The Kremlin has repeatedly denied involvement, and Lavrov again described the actions against his country as provocative. He added Russia is also seeking a meeting with the leaders of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to discuss the case. Meanwhile, doctors treating Sergei Skripal's daughter, Yulia, say she is recovering quickly. She is known to be conscious and speaking, but her father still remains in critical condition. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been ordered to stand trial for corruption and abuse of power. He has faced multiple corruption investigations since leaving office 6 years ago, and just last week he was handed preliminary charges for taking millions of euros in illegal campaign financing from ex-Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. A court on Thursday sent Sarkozy to trial for a separate case in which he is accused of colluding with a judge while serving as president to find out how far magistrates had got into another fraud investigation against him. Sarkozy and his lawyer allegedly promised the judge a lucrative position in Monaco in return for the information. The judge and the lawyer have also been ordered to stand trial. All three deny any wrongdoing, and Sarkozy's team says he will appeal the court decision. The families of 68 people who died in a fire at a police station in northern Venezuela are demanding answers as they wait for officials to turn over the remains of their loved ones. Wednesday's fire inside the holding cells sparked violent protests outside the Carabobo State Police headquarters, forcing police to fire tear gas at grieving relatives. The detention centre was built to house about 60 inmates, but contained 200 at the time of the fire. Among the dead were 66 male inmates and 2 female visitors, and scores more have been injured. 4 prosecutors are reported to have been assigned to investigate the blaze, the cause of which is still unknown.
Good morning. Spring surely is in full swing in South Korea and neighboring countries. Major cherry blossom festivals are well underway, and here in South Korea, this Sunday, the Jinhae Gunangje Festival will kick off. Korea's biggest spring festival attracts at least 2 million visitors every year to Changwon, Gyeongsang-namdo province. And the weather will be good for any outdoor activities, as the warming trend will continue today and into the weekend, with sprinkles expected on Sunday for northern regions. And for today, mostly sunny skies will dominate with better air, but do check the dust levels before heading out. And daily highs will be similar to a tad lower than yesterday, getting up to 20 degrees Celsius here in the capital, and Gyeongju will get up to 16 degrees. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. So many parts of South Korea will be under plenty of sunshine with highs in the 20s today. Most parts of North Korea will have similar weather conditions to the south. And as for the rest of Asia, Bangkok will have nice weather conditions with clouds and sunshine. In Perth, beach weather is in the forecast for the Easter weekend. Heading to North America, spring is yet to arrive in Chicago, with chilly spring conditions in the forecast for the time being. And as for South America, it's going to be another sunny and hot day in Santiago and Buenos Aires. Taking you to Europe, Britain could see freezing weather conditions over Easter, with a storm set to arrive nationwide this weekend. Lastly, to Africa, Algiers and Cape Town will have a rainy Friday. And that's all the weather update for now.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for now. Our next bulletin is coming up at noon Korea time in around an hour and a half from now. So until then, goodbye.